He's been hustling since the age of 12, built one of the most trusted companies in solar, and after 15 years at the helm, he sold it. Now, for the first time, he's learning how to stop building.
I remember a piece of advice that was given to me probably in the 2017-18 era. I was working nonstop around the clock, constantly traveling. I had to be tenacious and pursue every single deal. And this one individual was in maybe his late 50s, probably early 60s at the time. And he talked about how he sold his business. I thought, oh, I'd really like to be like him and learn from him. And he said, never forget the grind. He said that once again, the process of building, treasure that, value that. And I think about the times I struggled, which were a lot. I think about the many years of hoofing it alone. Those were tough and difficult points in our journey. There's a huge sense of accomplishment when you overcome those obstacles. And that's very much how I felt when I went through that process myself.
Hey, welcome back to SunCast. Thank you once again for giving us the only non-renewable resource you've got. That, of course, is your time. I promise we're going to take good care of it today. Today's guest, in fact, has heard me say that a few hundred times, as not only is he a return guest multiple times, but one of my most fanatic listeners. I'm honored to be able to welcome the founder of Clean Energy Associates, my friend Andy Klump, back to the show. And you all know Andy's story. If you don't, then you probably aren't in the clean energy sector, I would argue. From Shanghai apartments to a global team trusted by the biggest developers in solar and storage, Andy has laid the tracks for what has become one of the most trusted businesses in solar in the very nature of the work that they did and do. But this time the story is different. Andy is not joining as the CEO of CEA. He's wrapped up his 2.5-year earnout. He's stepped away from the CEO seat. And in his words, not mine, he's on a sabbatical. We're going to find out what that's all about and what he's up to next in this episode of SunCast. Well, Andy, like I said, you've been hustling since you were 12. I'm glad that you're taking a moment, not just with your family, but to breathe deeply and relax into another episode with us here on SunCast. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nico. It's great to be here. And just with all of our past time together, it's part of feeling like just coming home. So.
Yeah, I know. There's some melancholy as well because, things change in life. And I think that I've had the privilege of watching as you've grown through the phase of letting go. You and I both have children. I mentioned you're on a sabbatical. Like we're watching our children grow up, and there's so many phases where we have to. They're just. I feel like parenting is stages of letting go, and letting your kids be who they're going to be. I'm curious from your perch now. What was harder, building a business or learning how to actually stop building?
That's a great question, and I think the time to pause and reflect is highly valued. But yeah, the position of like stop building, that's very hard. And I knew it would be hard back when I sold the business first in 2022, and I purposely chose an exit that would give me an off ramp because I was going 100 miles an hour up until that point.
Right.
I probably slowed down to 70 miles an hour or some other still fast speed, but maybe it's still closer to 80, 85. So still going from 80 down to 0 is a challenge, but it's one that I'm enjoying, but also dealing with the pros and cons and this internal struggles on all that fronts.
You know, you led hundreds of people across continents for more than a decade. I'm curious, what parts of the rhythm of being in that CEO role do you miss the most, and which parts are you definitely happy to not repeat?
Oh, I definitely miss the time with the team and time with clients. Being kind of in the trenches with the teams, sorting through various obstacles, brainstorming, problem solving, just doing whatever it took to adjust and pivot to what had to be done. Those are the parts of the struggle I really enjoyed the most. And once again, some of that was in the factory. Some of it was in the Shanghai office with the team. Some of it was just on the road or various conferences, definitely in clients' offices, talking and brainstorming and listening and hearing problems and really trying to brainstorm. That's what I miss the most. But on the flip side, I definitely do not miss the lack of sleep or a poor attention to health, constantly putting everyone
Mhm.
else's needs above my own. But the sleep deprivation was probably what is the least part of the job that I dislike. So that is it's nice to go back and not have that ongoing expectation. I'm going to have to get by on 4 hours of sleep most nights this week. That's a big change.
Yeah, I can identify with that. I just turned 46 back in October on our 10th anniversary of the podcast, actually. And I was reflecting with my wife how I've said many times I built SunCast from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And you and I often will reflect on how like the muscle memory of entrepreneurship develops in and of itself, like certain lesions, like adhesions, as they say in the PT world. And I think that one of those for most entrepreneurs, myself included, is this false assumption or this false sort of truth for us that, oh, I can get by on less than X hours. For me, it was like, oh, I need 5 to 6 hours of sleep. Well, it turns out like I've tracked my sleep since 2011, 12-ish, like one of the early users of the Jawbone wristband and all the Fitbits and all the early Basic, which Intel bought and shut down. Like I've really tracked my sleep a long time. And I know categorically that I need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And what's been fun over the last 5 to 6 months, Andy, and I feel like you're probably in this role too right now. It's like I've been watching and hearing from folks like you that idea of like, oh, well, once I sold my company, I finally got a chance to sort of catch up on sleep. And I'm like, wait a minute, well, what does it look like if before I sell my company, I catch up on sleep? And it turns out, man, that all the times I've made fun of my friends that go to bed at 9:30, like the nights that I go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and wake up without an alarm at 6 a.m. Are when I know that I am at peak performance. And man, it turns out sleep is my superpower. Like I get more done on days where I've been like, and it takes me like 4 or 5 days to get out of sleep debt. It can sometimes take 2 weeks. But I'm actually curious about, there's a question buried in here, Andy, but what I've noticed is that when I'm done sort of overcoming my sleep debt, I am way more efficient and even smarter in many ways. How has that shown up for you in terms of like that, again, that desire to build, the need to sort of pull back and stop building? Now you've caught up on sleep. And I imagine just your reserves are full. I'd love to just hear that experience for you.
Yes, I can just categorically say it's been a few months since I've had to schedule anything at night.
Amazing.
Whereas it was literally a minimum of 4 days a week.
Yeah.
Sometimes Friday nights. I took those only on emergencies, but there often were a lot of fires that would be put out, and you're the one who has to jump on that call, as you know. So it is absolutely you're 100% spot on. It's just the clarity of thought that you have once you have a full 7.5, 8 hours of sleep. It's amazing when you do that consecutive nights and throughout the whole week. It's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
So I'm 100% with you on that. And yes, you think more clearly. You can handle stress much better. You just have a different vantage point on life. You can perform better. I've seen improvements in my exercise routine and various other metrics. So I'm just not as anxious before. So yes, all those things are true. And if you read Matthew Walker's Why We Sleep, you'll see and understand that there are a lot of negative consequences to lack of sleep, whether it's measured by accidents on the road or what have you. You study any kind of longevity biohacking types, they will, the ones who are really informed will say sleep is the number one factor to really improve your health overall. It's not eating, it's not exercise. Those two other factors do matter, but sleep is the number one.
Now, what's interesting is Matthew Walker's book is about sleep and dreams. What did you learn about dreams from that book?
I have been writing down my dreams more frequently when I was after reading that book. So I had an ongoing list of kind of dream tracking. One thing I will say, it's interesting, since coming back, I haven't remembered my dreams as much. I'm sleeping much better.
Oh, yeah.
But I used to sleep a much shorter stints when I was in Asia, but then I would remember the dreams. So I don't know if my REM sleep at the end of the night is longer, and so I forget the dreams now, but that is one thing I've noticed on that.
Another book that we've talked about is Dan Coyle's Culture Code. I bring it up simply because I know culture was a real key contributor to how CEA evolved. For those who've listened to past episodes, Andy readily admitted that he wasn't the best at balancing sort of the sales drive with the EQ required of building a team. But you were able to turn that corner in no small part thanks to the team that you built, who were able to come around you and help you sort of mature as a founder. You created a culture book at CEA, something that Tony Hsieh at Zappos started to sort of institute. I know that's one of the things that you learned from Tony. I'm curious how, once you knew that the acquisition was imminent, how you started thinking about protecting the culture you had built.
So you're absolutely right on all those comments on culture. And I would say the culture transformation of CA really started in 2015, and it was a 2-year process. But once we hit our stride on the culture building and the talent we brought on, then it really became a very rapid growth in the company and overall success. But yes, as I was going down the exit process, I was very concerned about having a light culture. And we did speak with multiple parties. But in the end, we chose, I think a very good fit. I like the alignment of a number of the core values of Intertek, but the culture of any large company is going to be very different from a small company just by inherent size. And so 200 folks, which we had at the time of the company was exited in 2022 versus the 44,000 at Intertek, I just knew there would be some amount of culture differences. But once again, the part that I had hope on was the fact that I had a very strong alignment with my previous boss, Bertrand Mallet, and I had several conversations with the CEO, Andre Lacroix. I have a tremendous amount of respect for both those individuals, both as executives and company leaders. And there was alignment on the desire to grow and to have an impact in the industry and to keep and retain the team. And those 3 high-level points I believed in and thought that alignment was what would kind of take the company to the next level, and that we would still be able to build on the CA culture. So I do respect that they didn't want me to rebrand right away. They didn't ask me to let anyone in the company go right away. There was a lot of respect for what had been built, and they wanted me actively involved in the business. And so for all those reasons, I thought that was great. I was fearful with other options that I would be either taken aside or have a diminished role in terms of decision making. But those are key pieces that I went about in my reflection process as I thought about Intertek being the right match.
I want to pull a thread on Intertek being the right match, because I remember you and I've talked often about just the entrepreneurial journey, and you made many recommendations to me as I started thinking about scaling SunCast and even taking on investors. Dean Solon talks about how he birthed his daughter Shoals, and then he eventually walked her down the aisle to meet or introduce her to her suitor, which was Oaktree, and then he walked them down the aisle to IPO, and then he was able to back away. And you've been through that process now. You birthed CEA, and you had to go through that process of sort of finding a suitor for your daughter. What are your reflections on the period where you started thinking, maybe it's time? How did you know that it was time to exit the business? How did you become certain that Intertek was the right partner?
So I'd seen a number of cycles in our industry, and having seen the ups and the downs, and I could kind of see where the pattern was repeating. And so I would have to go back to my early days of our first massive growth spurt, which was really the 2012 to 2015 era.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't until 2016 when we had kind of a peak at that point in the CA business and an area of high growth that someone said, "Have you ever thought about selling your company?" And I said, "No, I really hadn't." But it brought about a conversation, and this happened to be with the banker that I later chose to work with. And that conversation got me thinking. And then I saw, one of the comments that was made was, you never sell at the very peak.
Yeah.
You always want to be building up, but give the other buyer a chance to get some upside on the transaction as well.
Right.
And then I was shocked. Like I really thought 2017 we'd still have growth because we had 4 or 5 years of straight growth. Things were great. And then the pullback in the safe harbor at that point in time led to a big drop at the start of the Trump presidency. And so 2017, the first half was brutal, and we lost money for the first time in company history, month over month, for 6 straight months. And that was very painful to watch.
Yeah.
And since I was funding everything, I just didn't see where there was definitely no sellable business in that type of trend.
Yeah.
So then I saw the latter half of 2017, we recovered. Then we saw very strong growth and profitability in both 2018 and 2019. And then 2020 was going to be the year of another great growth story. And then I thought, okay, I had a few inbound interests and late 2018 and early 2019, but it wasn't really until late 2019 we had a very well-respected party that was of a similar size and scale as Intertek.
Right.
That, wow, this is actually very different from other requests. This M&A team is very organized. They've introduced me to business owners. And so early 2020 was the time I was thinking about that step.
Yeah.
And then, as we all know, COVID happened, and the world turned upside down. And it gave me about a year to kind of pause, reflect, prepare, do a few other things in terms of the company structure that made the most sense. But I saw once again how that previous pattern had kind of collapsed in 2017. And I said, I don't want to have that happen again. COVID was already a big shock, but we were stable. We didn't grow. We didn't shrink. We were still profitable. And so I knew come 2021 that there was growth again. And I said, okay, now's the time to restart this process and go down that path. And I also had another observation, which is based on my time in China. And I saw and witnessed some of the challenges of doing business in China. I saw it was also an environment that was much tougher for foreigners, and especially company owners. And so I said, look, as a sole owner and operator who's an American in China, this is not a business I could just own for 10 or 20 years.
Right.
I need to have someone who had a proper, deep presence in China, could really take the company to the next level, and also help support in case any government policy change would have an impact on our business.
You found ultimately a match in Intertek and consummated a deal at what probably was the perfect time to sort of looking back on the timing of things. But part of that deal, and you and I talked about this a lot offline, because I very much do not, as a business, want an earnout, and everybody tells me, no, you're really not. If you really want to swing for the fences, you're going to have an earnout. And so I'm grappling with that reality. Nevertheless, you built a business that even with 200 people, you were still very much required as a key man, if nothing else, from then the enigmatic founder with all the connections. And I think, you rightly accepted somewhere around a 2.5 year earnout. That period is intentional by an acquirer because they want to make sure that your customers stay, your team stays. And often it's difficult because you're watching some part of you not just evolve, like die, right? Because you are gonna, that it probably is impermanent. So I'm curious about that part, that you part, not the business part, but what did that period teach you about leading through transition and about yourself as a leader?
Yes, I found my leadership style having to adapt, no doubt, in the midst of that kind of structural change. I had to learn to swallow my tongue a little bit more. I've always been fairly
Politics.
Yes, very eager to share my mind, but also inviting others to disagree with me and have that open conflict. And that's where I feel like having a certain amount of disagreement among the leadership team and various folks in the company was always a positive. So I would encourage others to speak out. And we had a lot of areas and opportunities for debate. We had a lot of anonymous surveys. We had some surveys that were open, where we knew who was responding, but others where it was entirely anonymous at the entire company level. We do that twice a year to measure team member satisfaction, the TM NPS, team member net promoter score.
Yep.
And so we did that since the early days of 2017. We were in the midst of culture transition.
Yeah.
We were actually negative for a
Hmm.
year or so because there was a lot of old CEA culture that was
Right.
my own fault and was toxic, and I had to go through and make some changes. But I reported that openly and transparently to the company.
Yeah.
And I think some, while they didn't like me, they at least appreciated that part.
Yeah.
So once I went through and we were trying to continue some of these surveys, some of these opportunities to reflect, I passed those on internally, and that wasn't regarded as highly. And eventually those other internal surveys went away. And I realized that I could only control so much in terms of some of the decision making around certain things, certain HR and financial functions. We kept our teams, which is very important to me because I knew the inner working and the alignment of culture throughout all of those teams was extremely important. But I also felt that I would still have a lot of say in hiring because you need to hire to grow. And I later learned that internal decision making around HR was not as easy as what I had thought it was.
Yeah.
So that's one of the challenges I had was just making compelling pitches to bring the right folks on board, invest in the business where we wanted to, and that's where I had to do a lot of rethinking
Yeah.
and choose my battles, so to speak.
You made reference to Net Promoter Score. I want to come back to that as well, because you're one of the few people, maybe the only one that I can think of, actually the only one I can think of right now, who think of Net Promoter Score as an internal metric as well as an external metric. I'm curious how that gets implemented. Is it similar in scope to how you do NPS with clients?
The simplicity of NPS is what makes it a great tool. We have, just very two simple questions. How would you rate your experience with the company, and why did you give us that score? And
Yeah.
so, very just two questions. That's it, and it made it very easy for clients to give a response. And you don't influence how that is, but the whole notion is you're highly weighted on promoters, which are 9 or 10, and if you're a 7 or 8, you're neutral. Then 6 and below is a negative and a detractor. So if you're in the 6 category, some people think, oh, it's largely positive, so I'll give it a 6. That actually hurts the scores. So for the last 4 or 5 years, we had a 70+% score, which was even greater than some of the great brands out there like Apple or Amazon. I was
Right.
very proud of the customer satisfaction we had. Internally, we did ask those same questions, but we later changed it to identify different groups in the company. And
Yeah.
so, especially when we grew well beyond 200 and of peaking around 250 team members, we broke it out by, in certain cases, it was geography. In other cases, it was by team. It depends on the team scale. One can never have less than 5 people in a proper survey. Otherwise, it becomes too
Yeah.
clear speaking out. So, but by the same token, when you had 50 or 70, then you had different groups who were involved. And for example, we discovered that some of the QA team members in China were extremely satisfied, but some of the QA team members outside of China were not. And so we had to kind of go through different groupings. So I would say that groupings did shift slightly over time, but it was, the created with the purpose and design that we wanted to give everyone a voice, and we wanted to try to change policies or make adjustments based on what certain team members in a geography or in a certain team were facing. And that helped us also uncover when sometimes it's a case of bad leadership, sometimes a case of bad policy, but whatever it was, we could try to address when there's a certain percentage of folks who are dissatisfied. And the other reality is that when you have a highly sophisticated, highly educated workforce, it was just so much talent at CA. They also had very high expectations. And so I found that our team member net promoter score was never as high as the clients were. So we were, I had people ask me, how is that possible? Well, I can assure you, I have high expectations myself, and I'm also very open-minded of encouraging negative feedback. And we also pushed for, tried to get 90 to 95% response rate.
Right.
Whereas customer surveys, I think, maybe within the 60, 70% level. So we didn't get all those detractors.
Is there anything you learned about positioning or sending out the NPS that got people to respond, and then the tactics for follow up? Because I think this is a really interesting point that you raised, and it's something that you guys did really well. So I'd love to learn from that.
So on the customer side, we've found because it was anonymous, we couldn't really remind or follow the customers beyond a second request. Third would be kind of extreme because inherently, if someone said, "Oh, I just put it in," and then you saw the score, then it would, ruin the anonymity piece.
Sure.
So you could only request a follow up so many times.
Yeah.
Whereas the team internally, we said, "Okay, we're at 80. That's not good enough. I'm extending the deadline another week. Now we're at 90." I would wait, and I kept pushing, and we have a variety of ongoing communications on a monthly basis at our all hands team meeting, and then various other steps of internal team meetings on a weekly basis, so we could keep pushing that message until we got to that 95% response rate. And then we said, okay, closing the curtain, we're cutting those off. And then I look for the results. Because if all of a sudden I said 80%, no one in HR responded, then all of a sudden I saw the numbers, then I could say, oh, I could kind of come to figure out a term. That's why we had a separate team that led that. And then I only got the results at the very end. And then we reflected on the executive leadership team, and then we communicated with the company. And so we kind of followed that sequence over time. But as you grow in scale, particularly at that level, multi-hundred level, those are some of the tips and tricks that we found to be helpful. But engaging the team was always extremely important. And just like we talked about, you have to engage the team if you really want to have, I'd say, a fully bought-in culture.
You were maniacal about numbers. I remember just how you are the guest who has followed up the most to say, like, hey, how's my episode doing, right? And like, you always had you are very intensely interested and curious by nature. And I wonder, what systems did you build for yourself to be able to keep track of the various things that you wanted to know about or prioritize? And I ask around like your own sort of sense of, like, you had a very good sense of self-promotion, and not in a bad way. I thought that you did it in a really nice way, but you had one of the better personal brands, and still do, of any founder in our industry. I think that others would acknowledge that as well. But you also, like, I know that what you did externally was a reflection of what you did internally. So I'm curious, what sort of systems did you put in place for yourself that helped you remember, like, oh, I do want to remember to go back and track that episode with Nico? Or how did you remember, like, oh, we're still tracking this NPS on this one campaign? Like, talk to me about those systems you put in place.
So at the highest level, especially the last half dozen years of CEA, with the great help of my executive coach, Mike Myro, I learned to kind of take it up a notch. And at the highest level, Mike helped me prioritize three things: team, culture, and strategy. And those were the three areas that ideally would split in equal time in each bucket. Probably strategy is what I deserved the least amount. But I was in the business for 17 years, so my thoughts on strategy kind of evolved, and I kind of maybe stuck with some older ways of thinking.
Yeah.
I really focused a lot more time on team as well as culture. And if I were really accomplishing those three areas, particularly those first two, the most, then I knew I'd be successful. That's why I cared so much about team NPS. You alluded to an external brand. For many years, I didn't really have much of a company brand. In fact, we didn't have a company LinkedIn account or anything else on social media for a long, long time. I did some early adoption of LinkedIn back in 2005, I think, before I was even in the industry, the early days of LinkedIn. So I was always an early adopter, but not a full big on promoter. But during COVID, all that changed. And I realized, hey, we need a complete change how we think about content marketing. It had a small marketing, 1 or 2 person marketing team starting in 2015 or 16, but it was a lot of myself going to various shows. I was the head of sales at the early days before Casey Marshall joined us in 2015, and we really started to build a proper commercial team and organization. There were a lot of things that I was just doing just word of mouth to build a business.
Right.
But I realized come 2020, we had to have an online presence. We had to be bigger into webinars, and we really transformed how we acted as a company, but also I acted as an individual. And so when I was in full rhythm, I was posting every single day, 5 days a week on LinkedIn, and followed that plan and approach. Obviously, I'm far less frequent now, maybe once or twice a month, if that. So it's very different environment. But the goal was really, how do you stimulate and activate your community
Yeah.
and connect with people? And I was still amazed, even until my last, a few months on board, we were still getting inbound leads once or twice a week, just because I put out a post about something totally random and someone said, "Oh, there's Andy. Hey, I forgot we had this one issue." And so it wasn't like it was a new connection per se, but it definitely led to lead generation. So
Yeah.
I inherently think, and I also read books on this, the CEO, and really I think the broader executive team needs to be active, needs to be promoting the company, the brand themselves, everything that we're doing to be effective, particularly in services. Because once again, I think the mantra of CEA is we hit a lot of singles. We did not have $100 million contracts. There were a lot of very small repeat clients. We did have some larger engagements that ended up being seven figures, but very few of our engagements were even in the six-figure size at one point in time. So you have to hit a lot of singles to hit the numbers that we were trying to accomplish. And I will say metrics as a whole, we had a very detailed operational sales and P&L owners who would go into and study those metrics. So those would roll up to myself, but at the highest level, I still had to focus on team culture and strategy to be effective. I would say it's also a little bit different from the approach of Intertek, because Intertek did care about numbers. We
Right.
used to review numbers weekly, maybe twice a month. They were literally looking at our sales numbers on a daily basis. So it's a very different cadence, and we had to adjust and adapt to that.
I'm curious what worked for you building that personal and corporate brand. What activities were the biggest catalysts? You mentioned webinars and the like, and posting daily on LinkedIn on your personal page. What were the things that, when you look back, were the biggest levers for you, got the most impact?
We had a fair amount of speaking opportunities, webinars, and I would say, by once again, this changed over time. So early days pre-COVID, it was definitely myself and the core team traveling to conferences, meeting with clients face to face, discussing problems, issues. I would always have various roadshows, hit various parts of East and Coast, West US, or Europe, and make those trips regularly. I think the most intense year of travel, I had 9 trips between China and the U.S.
Wow.
So those days were long gone by the time COVID happened. So then we really shifted to the online presence. We still did a fair number of webinars. We did work with external third parties and having co-hosted webinars and sessions, but later we found it was most effective just building up our own following, so to speak, as a company, and then marketing to that group, and then building out database over time. So I'd say, marketing, the famous saying is, you know that 50% of your budget is high impact, and another 50% is not. You just don't know which 50%. So it was really a mix of a lot of different things, but that's where we had experienced executives like Jay Geedy, Rebecca Silver, and those on the team who were trying to track as much as possible. And we kept revisiting that strategy.
Yeah.
If I could just add one last thing, I would also say, PR was probably one of the biggest bangs for our buck. And it was shocking to me when all of a sudden we were mentioned in some type of, Wall Street Journal or some other mainstream media. That led to a pretty significant pop in our following. And that's where I gave a lot of credit to Peter Kelly at Renewcom. And we probably underutilized PR through the years, but I wish we had done more of that. On the flip side, once we were acquired by Intertek, they didn't understand the importance of bylines, and every single external media reference had to be approved by the CEO. That was just the corporate policy. So that was an example where we just stopped trying at some point. It was just very difficult to get those approvals, and just wasn't worth the squeeze. So if I were to give advice to other founders at an earlier stage or mid-sized companies, I would absolutely say PR is kind of your secret strategy that one doesn't fully think or respect, but the ROI is very, very high if you nail it right with the right firm to help you.
That's cool. And at our SunCast Summit this last October, we keyed in on 2 really important things. One is that PR is not as hard to get as people think it is. And 2 is that a lot of people think that PR is dead, but in the era of a generative AI search model, I mean, just at the time of this recording, just last week, ChatGPT launched their own browser, Atlas, right? And in a world where generative AI search is the norm, your ability to get backlinks on your website is less relevant. Your ability to get engagement and views on certain channels is less relevant than your ability to get mainstream media to say something about you, because that credibility and that weight in the search algorithms for Gen AI is still very heavy. Like the ability, to your point, to get into Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg or Newsweek or Forbes or any of the main channels that folks would recognize outside of our sector rather than industry trade journals. One of my colleagues recently who attended the summit said, PR is back, baby. And I think you're underscoring that for us.
No, indeed. It is, once again, it's very difficult to kind of measure on certain things, but when you have these repeat bylines, and we were in that brand building phase for a number of years, certainly 2020 on till today, those were very effective, and we saw the drop off when we stopped that activity or reduced it. So my advice to any fast growing company in our sector is just take the time to invest and be thoughtful about how one does it.
Yeah.
And also it's important for the executive team to be engaged.
Yeah.
It's very easy to say, oh, just pushing it off to one person in marketing and we're done. It's not quite that simple.
It's not. And I know you, your team did a great job of positioning you and Paul and other leaders in the organization as thought leaders and speakers in the industry. And I think the CEA did probably, I remember telling my team, they were like, because we were in the process of offering what we call live broadcasts as webinars. And we just did a really successful one with CEA just before you left. But for years, I was like, nah, I'm not going to bother with trying to sell anything to CEA that they do as well or better than us. And to your credit, your team just did such an incredible job of getting the CEA brand sort of known through that thought leader spectrum that I often used you and CEA as examples when I would show others, like, this is why it matters. This is how you can build both the CEO brand authority and the corollary brand authority of the company by ensuring that you are a point of reference when others look to the market and say, well, what does CEA think? Or what does Andy think? Or, I think the other thing that you guys did really well, and CEA continues to do very well, is sort of that GTM playbook of coming out with industry reference guides, things that people would put into their market, their own, not just marketing materials, but their internal planning documents. Well, CEA says this, right? This many X megawatts or gigawatts. And when you become that reference guide, you are irrefutably a market expert. I think that you did that really well, Andy, and I just want to, I wanted to point that out. Another thing that I think you did well, at least from the outside looking in, is taking care of your team. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on really caring for the integrity of the team through that exit period. What are some practical things that made a difference?
Well, to your first point, I will say I entirely give it the credit to the team, and we have a fantastic team. We spent a lot of time rebuilding our HR systems, having repeatable processes around recruiting, and I think that really played out over time. But we also invested heavily in the culture. I think that 2015 to 17 period of rebuilding the culture, that actually came out. And as we hired more and more rock stars in 2018, 19, and 20, that was the team. I think I really give them the credit for building things to where the latter half of CA's growth growth trends went. To the broader question of just taking care of the team, yes, it was a challenge upon completing the exit. I was adamant that no one be fired. I wanted to preserve the team makeup and also make sure that they were taken care of. So it was a longer planning process to approve salary adjustments. And there were a lot of corporate policies that we had to obviously comply with. And so I was very supportive of doing that. But it required a lot of sprint and then wait, hurry up and wait type of cycles. But one had to be very methodical about saying, okay, we can only get certain approvals through at this period of time. So let's pause on others and there were, Intersect, like a lot of publicly traded companies, is very focused on the numbers. And so they had constraints to work within. And then we had to then work within certain constraints. And so in a fast moving industry, particularly in emerging markets that included China, India, Philippines, and elsewhere, sometimes you had salary adjustments that one had to make, which were very different from the rest. And so we had to think through, okay, how do we navigate this? We can't just give someone an annual salary bump just because inflation in India or in Shanghai is crazy at a certain period of time. And so you have double digit inflation. Folks are looking just to stay up in line with inflation, but you can't just use standard approach. You have to say, okay, how do I evaluate this individual's performance and their team performance? And are there promotion opportunities or other areas where we can expand their role? And I give a lot of credit to Bertram LA, who at the time was the EVP of Industry Services. He managed 25 different teams and P&Ls within his broader purview. And so he helped give advice and perspective, and there was a lot of iterative back and forth. And there's also very limited time to make decisions. As I had very brief windows just on a Tuesday or Friday to talk with him, I had to fit in a lot of topics, and it was a lot of rapid fire talking to various team members. But I was very passionate about protecting the team, trying to keep as many folks engaged as possible, and then communicating down to the team and saying what happened. And so it was often very iterative and required a lot of flexibility. But that's also where I was still taking a lot of late night calls throughout my entire time in Asia to talk with the London headquarters, and then turn around and be up at 5 a.m. to talk with the team and give them that feedback and move ahead very quickly.
The last time you were on SunCast, Andy, you were obviously in full scale mode. I feel like it was a couple of hundred episodes back now. I can't remember exactly which one. I always brought you on like the zeros, like the 700 and the 500. If you think back to 2017, that time period, 2018, where you finally got the culture right and you started into that inflection point of revenue growth, if that Andy were sitting here today, what do you think would surprise him most about how the story unfolded?
Boy, I would say I was most excited about the team that we had hired. I could not have anticipated the level of talent that would eventually come and join the organization.
Yeah.
So yes, we did make a lot of shifts in the culture. We tried to adjust where we were going as an organization. I made some bold predictions. I still remember thinking through, wow, if we ever get to 100 or even 150, that would be amazing. I was thinking that's 5, 7, 10 years down the road, and I had no idea how we would eclipse those numbers so quickly.
Yeah.
That was difficult to be a prognosticator and just predicting the future. I always build up excitement with the team, but it was very hard to really figure out what is the right cadence and how to talk openly about that growth, but at the same time not overpromise. That's probably what had happened in that 2017 to 2020 era. We predicted certain numbers and we just blew right through them.
Yeah,
it was very hard to figure out how to adjust based on what the market was asking for.
Well, I've had the pleasure of meeting one of the folks who had a big impact on your capacity to do that, Mike Myro. You mentioned him earlier. I'd love for you to take some time now and talk through the decision framework, or kind of when and why did you decide to hire a coach? Because that's something that I find CEOs struggle with. I'm impressed often when I see young CEOs investing in advice and coaching, and I'm often baffled by CEOs who are more seasoned and they neither invest in coaching or peer groups, nor do they read a lot. So I think I see patterns in sort of how you interact with the world and other folks that I see who embrace coaching, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yes, I remember very early on in my business, I had heard about the concept of an executive coach and thought about it, but not, I wasn't able to implement anything. And so I still remember we were at maybe 7, 8 people, 2010, 2011. And I had chatted with an executive coach, ironically was in Boston. And I had even had traveled in the region. And so sat down, met with him. He walked through kind of his methodology, and I explained the team. And after a session or two, he said, until you really have a leadership team, it's going to be very tough for me to really make an impact. And I realized, I looked around, and it was pretty much myself with a few interns, one or two, junior, senior consultant, supply chain folks, and then one guy who was just kind of part-time, who was a little more seasoned. And so I realized, okay, I guess I got to put this on hold. And so it was always in the back of my mind, but around 2015, we had gone through some serious growth. I had made a pretty serious, I wouldn't say fatal, but a significant mishap and mishire in terms of hiring someone who is the head of HR, and that individual's behavior was quite toxic. And I didn't know this until after the fact, but I heard this indirectly through my team. And this is well before we did TMNPS or any other kind of internal survey metrics. And so that was a major shock that I had overlooked that. And a lot of it, some of the toxic behavior happened when I was out of the office. I heard about it secondhand and had to go through and validate this. And then I realized, okay, we are hiring a bit more seasoned folks. Folks who come from a seasoned background don't necessarily identify with the whole startup CEA internal culture as it was, but we need to really start to mainstream this. I at least need to educate myself more. And I studied and heard different topics about culture in business school, but it just was in one ear and out the other because I didn't have any practical leadership experience. So it wasn't really until 2015 I was on a search, and I realized that we had a problem with turnover. I realized that it was myself who was part of the problem. And so I went down the path with a 6-month executive coach to really work on myself.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who did the 360. I got a lot of very negative feedback. That was an eye opener. And then I went through it, and her assignment really was time stamped. So I knew I needed to hire a systems and process coach, which is exactly what Mike Myro was. And that's where we walked through Rockefeller Habits 2.0, also known as scaling up. And there was really a very clear methodology. And I don't say like I'm the guru on that methodology, and there's EOS and others as well.
Yeah.
But I think the key thing I would tell startup founders is once you're at a certain scale, and it's somewhere between 10 and 50, I think it depends on the size of the organization. It could be much smaller. It could be 10 people is the right size, depending on the seniority that one has. Or it could be as few as 20 or 30, depending on those organizations and the structure. But having that alignment is extremely key. And I wish I had started sooner. So it's whether it was 2012, 13, or 14, I don't know. But we caught it a little bit too late in 2015. But at least we caught it, we pivoted, and that 2015 to 2017 period was the rebuilding of CEA's culture. And that's what really led to our success.
And was Mike instrumental in helping that cultural rebuild?
So I went through this early 2015 period for about 6 months, and then I was searching kind of in parallel. And then I met Mike in the fall of 2015, and then we had him out to China in January of 2016. So he really started in late 2015 with myself and a few others, and then he really got to know the broader team at that point in time. And we were still roughly a 50-person organization around that time. But it was absolutely instrumental to have someone to walk us through how do you identify and build those core values, and then how do you create that culture and take the company to the next level.
Did you ever participate in anything that was similar to YPO?
At the early days in 2015, I was in EO, an entrepreneurs organization, a fantastic organization. Anyone who has $1 million of revenue would qualify. I could have qualified much earlier, but I didn't know about it until 2015. And so a lot of this happened in this time where I was searching for an executive coach. I was reading books. I was trying to educate myself on how to build a world-class company. And EO was a great first step for me. EO does have an accelerator program where if your revenue is sub $1 million, but you at least have a handful of folks, you can start to participate and gain access to some of the insights. And then you grow and graduate into the full EO program. I later did join YPO back in 2019 in Shanghai, and then migrated chapters to Bangkok and now to Boston. And so YPO is definitely transformational because it gave me more of a broader global view. A lot of the folks there were they were actually corporate leaders. About a third is like corporate business executives. A third are family run companies or second or third generation, some seventh generation companies. And
Yeah.
then about a third that are entrepreneurs, whereas EO is just exclusively entrepreneurs. So I had a wider perspective to look at running a global business. And by that point in 2019, I'll say the CEA already was in roughly 10 markets at that time, or 12 maybe. We reached 15 plus by the time of 2022. But that was YPO was also extremely helpful. And once again, both of these organizations operated as kind of a group of peers. And so one has a monthly gathering with roughly 7, 8, 9 others and can really learn face to face from others what challenges they're facing, what's happening in the markets, anything and everything related to your personal and professional lives that can help you improve and get better. And so those networks were extremely valuable and helped me grow as a person as well as grow CA as a business leader.
Why do you suppose those networks that are sort of cross spectrums exist in a way that we don't have in the industry itself? I kind of think about like Salesforce is a tool that kind of anybody can use in any industry or vertical as a CRM, but then there are very vertical specific like dentist and doctor's office CRMs. Is there anything that functionally about the way EO and YPO work that just won't scale or won't work well inside of a particular industry vertical?
No, there's nothing that would say that it would not work. I think it's just an issue of studying and observing a lot of different industries is actually quite helpful. And also it avoids the problem of any potential conflicts of having competitors working in the same forum. Obviously, I would not be willing to be open if I knew that my other Shanghai-based QA firm was also in that same forum, and he said, "Oh, Andy has problems with his daughter, and he's got family challenges, and I'm going to capitalize on that, and he's not able to travel in these 6 months." That's clearly something that the groups are meant to avoid. And so having a cross functional or cross industry group and spectrum was extremely important. When I was referring to cross geography, a lot of the chapters have businesses that are more local. Right. And once again, if someone owns a few restaurants or builds up some type of delivery service or other local based service, then they're thinking operating in Shanghai or maybe it's in China. I was dealing with global issues. I was working with folks in 12 countries by the time I joined YPO, and I needed someone who I was dealing with, anything ranging from employment policies in the Philippines to governmental shifts in the U.S., Europe, whatever. And so it was helpful to understand, okay, how does the Chinese government react to certain industries in certain ways? How do I anticipate and think and grow in my business? So that's why I was referring to cross-geographic growth. But in terms of solar-specific depth, I mean, obviously there are folks with solar expertise in both EO and in YPO. I'd set up informal groups with some of those leaders, and we would chat and carry various topics and conversations. But I wasn't necessarily joining them in a forum on a monthly basis per se. Yeah. But some of them being clients, folks like John Berger, I've known for 20 plus years. He's also on YPO, and I think we both benefited from those networks.
Andy, turn the corner as you have in your career now to the Sabbatical. I'm curious, and I was joking with another fellow friend of ours, Scott Muller, who's been on a self-proclaimed Sabbatical now for about a year. What does that look like for you right now? How are you structuring rest without losing that sense of purpose?
So it is very difficult to slow down, and I have in some ways accelerated on a variety of other fronts, things that are going on in my personal life. The shift from Asia to US is one shift. The movement to Boston, which is a new city for both myself and my wife, is another one. Having 4 daughters, particularly one in high school, is exciting and fun, but also it's a much more hands-on type of style. So there's a lot more pickups, drop-offs, more advanced homework, and a variety of other ways to engage. Whereas before in previous years, we didn't quite have that. The complexity of also owning a home is very different from renting. So that's also another transition, and particularly owning a historic home that requires a great amount of upkeep and maintenance. And we're going through renovation that was supposed to have been finished back in July. So suddenly all those like empty spaces get get fitted, get busy quite quickly, particularly when you have multiple contractors and trucks up and down the driveway. Just even as we speak, I could hear the ladder going up for the painter. And I frankly, one of the things that's a big frustration to me, and I've been waiting for this moment for literally decades. I used to own a home in Shanghai where we installed solar back in 2000.
Yeah.
2008. It was a 1.14 kilowatt system. It had 6 panels. There were 185s from SunTek.
Amazing.
I still remember those days and love that. But I couldn't install solar until I had a house here in the US. And the challenge is I have the panels on my roof. I've got the storage system from Franklin installed, but I can't get the system turned on because the inspector came and said, I don't like how the storage devices were stored. You need to flip them 90 degrees. Well, they're already in cement, a cement pad that's been laid, and that worked for another installation for Boston Solar, but it does not work in the city of Newton that we live in.
Oh, man.
So I have a nice system which looks great every time I peek out the window. Can't use any of those electrons yet, so we're still struggling with those type of things. So to answer the broader question, there's a lot of things about being a dad that one can't measure or it can't really articulate.
Right.
I greatly enjoy my time with my family. We've gone apple picking. We've watched Boston's Red Sox games. We just went to a Boston college football game the other day. There's a lot of activity that I just had never done previously with in Shanghai. So it's fun to go back and experience once again a life in America. But do that in a more relaxed way where I know I don't have to rush off to a call. I do still wake up twice a week at 4:15 a.m. so I can take my daughter to swimming practice.
Wow.
Leave by 4:30. So those that time in the car was something I did not do.
Yeah.
And now when I do spend that time, I look at it as a gift. I don't view it as a chore. With 4 active daughters, there's a lot of things that require my time, but I enjoy those moments. I treasure the chance to put them down at bed and say a prayer at night, and just the small moments. I often forget those times, but my mom was very active because my dad was working 60 hours a week as a taxi cab driver. He did not make a lot of those events during the week, but I'm glad I'm able to be there. And I don't often see all fathers able to make the pickup and drop offs, but I try to participate as many as I can and help out with the homework. Those are things that are intangible that one never really measures, but at the same time, they're priceless and the most precious. So those are the parts of the Sabbatical that I distinctly enjoy.
When you look out now as you are settling in Boston, kind of reestablishing life in the US and taking stock of what's next, a lot, we'll talk about it as like the second half. You're still quite young. You've spent much of your life in motion. Now you're sort of sitting in the harbor, looking out over the horizon. I'm curious what trends or sectors get you excited right now as you've had a chance to sort of sit back and reflect without the need to find something that works for you. What do you see that is just working and or gets you excited that it might have potential?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think we all, in our industry are very clear of the high growth of data centers and the need for energy, particularly renewable energy, to support those data centers. But it's not just any one silver bullet to just a solar and storage that can solve all of the data center needs throughout the U.S. and other parts of the world. So being open and understanding that trend and understanding the dynamics in power, not just power consistency, but also power quality. Yeah. And so that widens your aperture beyond just renewables and say, look, are there energy efficiency or other technologies that have to do with data center growth? Right. I think secondarily, the clear trends in AI, the adoption of AI, the use of AI in a variety of ways. In a lot of ways, and I think we're in a more traditional sector, one can't necessarily just adopt and shift to AI. I saw that in-house within Intertek. They did have a team, an initiative, but there were a lot of parameters by which larger companies can operate in AI to make sure that some of that information does not just go out into the open forum. So I think small to mid-sized companies are in a better position to maybe adapt some more nimble and flexible approaches to using AI. I see this in startups that I talk to now that are launching their business with a fraction of the people they once did to have the similar amount of output. in terms of building out their product or focusing on other areas outside of just pure coding. So I think studying that AI trend is also important. And I'd say the last key trend that I keep my eyes on is definitely robotics. And I see there's a Luminous Robotics as an example, and is based in Boston. Uh, Others who are following a similar trend of just saying, how do we use robotics to reduce some of the dependence on labor? Those are important trends. I think it's just very clear in the midst of all government uncertainty, reduction of the IRA, and a lot of other geopolitical trends, decoupling from China and the like. One has to view that we have to figure out ways to do it, more efficient. We have to deploy more efficiently, more cost effectively, using automation and a variety of robotic techniques. There are paths to go and grow and develop. Cost escalation is clearly something we've known. Inflation, is here for a while. So how does one use technology to your advantage? I think that's the broader theme, and those are some of the things that I tend to be reading, observing, talking to folks, and I see Boston as an area to interact with some very interesting folks on those dimensions. So I'm happy to be here.
You've been able to invest in and mentor other founders, and I'm curious what patterns you're seeing in leaders that are building the kinds of cultures you want to invest in.
There are a lot of companies I've been involved with informal mentorship and then sat on advisory board capacity for others. Others have taken an active role and actually invested in them. And I'd say there are a lot of folks, when the announcement of the IRA came about, it was just understanding the pivot. And sometimes they're positive pivots. And I hate to say it, but some well-run companies are surviving now where others are not. And unfortunate that the collapse of some certain companies has happened, but it does lead to efficiencies in the market. And one of the things I always say, survival is king. And there were many days, especially in the early years of CEA, where survival was the goal. Making payroll was the goal.
Right.
It wasn't about thriving and hitting a certain growth rate. It was just, how do we keep our head above water?
Yeah.
And so I certainly caution a lot of younger entrepreneurs who haven't had that history of working through a downturn or building a company through a downturn, to don't get too ambitious, to be patient, play the long game, and focus on company survival tactics. And unfortunately, that does require that some people have to trim their staff or make other cuts, lead to freezes on transportation. Those are not popular topics to talk about with one's team.
Yeah.
But how you communicate through a crisis, how a leader works through and navigates through those changes is extremely important. And that's where I was always very, very clear about having a clear communication process and methodology.
Yeah.
And consistency, so that there were as few surprises as possible. But when you had to deal with these changes, you had mechanisms, receiving team feedback, talking internally as a team, as an executive team about those cases. Those were all very, very important and extremely crucial to continue to lead successfully. And I still go back to my early days in 2017 when we had those 6 straight months of losing money. And I know Paul Wormser had just joined CEA's team, and we're having this discussion of like, do we need to consider layoffs? I've never done that in the company history. And I'm so glad we didn't, because we wouldn't have been able to pivot back and go to high growth had we not had that core team.
Right.
We never cut salaries. We stuck with it. I had to just keep swallowing my tongue to make sure I wasn't struggling too much, but we had the cash to make it through. And if one is dependent on outside capital or have investors who have extremely high returns, it's also very tough to navigate those ups and downs. But patience and playing for the long game is ideally where I encourage folks to play.
As a reader, I know that you've probably spent some time reading Ray Dalio's Principles and thought about the principles that not only gave you success, but that you are sort of instituting into the fabric of how you operate. You've built and exited a global company. I'm curious what principles are guiding the way that you think about this next chapter in your life.
The future has not been crafted yet. I've had no shortage of opportunities, ranging from very large companies in our sector who've asked me to take a variety of executive roles, to small, mid-sized companies, some public, some private, but it's still in that potential high growth phase. And then there's startup ideas I have, and I brainstorm with a few folks here and there. And then there's other, those are all kind of operating sets of roles and opportunities that I've evaluated and kind of think through. Then there's also the other side of like saying, okay, I could be an investor or a board member, kind of more of an advisory capacity, and see and observe the market. I think there's also a nice hybrid that I'm in a good position to do where I could stay on a board role for a company that I like and see a lot of potential with, and then could drop to an operating level later. And that way I build up a track record. I understand the trends. One can only observe the trend from a board level so much, but that's where I really look down to say, like, who do I see on the team I really trust, and I see a long-term business model that can play out and how things will evolve, and where that trust is built up. That takes time. And so the challenge I have is I have a desire to make impact on a shorter period of time. I wouldn't refer to myself as young. I think you may have made that comment, but I certainly am not old enough that I don't have I've got a couple of good runs with me in my future, but I don't, if I take a 17-year period to grow, scale, and exit another company, I've done something wrong. So it should be a shorter period of time. But that's the advantage of working with a startup or a technology or a product that has some traction, that has the potential to grow. And that's where I will say, having worked in services, I know the services domain very, very well, and can certainly go very deep on that front. But the flip side, I value the high growth potential of product and technology based companies. So I'm more geared towards the latter as I think about my next chapter. And I'm not in a rush to make a decision. I definitely don't plan to make any announcements this fall. But as I look to 26 and beyond, I am mindful of the fact that I want to have that impact on the sector, have an impact on the lives of my family. I can't, also do both at the same speed as I once did, and still sleep 7 or 8 hours a night. So there are a variety of seasons in your life. You have to sprint and prioritize various things. So I'm very appreciative and grateful that I can prioritize family. I can prioritize my health for a change, and I can greatly reduce my travel. Those are some of the things as I think about the next step, I will reflect on it. Obviously, I've also gained more experience, and if you've read any books on the topic of fluid intelligence, that concept is one that I kind of picked up more recently from an old business school professor. And the notion is, once again, I don't have to go down that same learning curve to build culture next time. But it's also, culture is not something you can just hit the go button and you build a culture overnight in 1, 2, 3 months. But coaching and building a team's awareness at the executive level by being a board member, that can be changed and guided, and with the help of an executive coach like Mike Myro, that could be accelerated in certain environments. And so once again, I could be on a board observer role or a board member role, and then later on say, hey, that's the type of company where I've seen them change, I've seen them embrace the future, and I myself could play a role and fill into that. Or I could just keep the optionality and see what else is on the horizon. So all those things are on the table, but I am very clear. I did enter this agreement with Intertek with the purpose of living through it. I did sign up for a non-compete period, and so definitely don't intend to do anything competitive with CEA. So those are some of the themes that kind of go through my mind as I think about the future.
Yeah. A few things that I want to hit on as we end here. I'll call this section maybe quick charge, if you will. The leadership habit that you'll never give up.
The leadership habit I will never give up is communication cadence. When it comes to the team, I would say communication cadence is hugely important. One can read Scaling Up and see and understand what I'm referring to, but having that cycle of communicating at various levels in an organization and being a leader there is extremely important. I would say the leadership habit that I practice on my own really still goes back to meditation, my gratitude journal, that quiet reflection at the start of the day.
Is that daily?
That's absolutely something I do daily. some 4:30 a.m. wake up calls can disrupt that.
Yeah.
I do bring my journal with me when I'm after drop off my daughter. Those are exceptions and not the rule. I really do try to stick to that daily habit on a personal front.
One thing every founder should absolutely not delegate.
Culture building. I used to think that I didn't understand culture. I felt as if, these are things related to HR policies. Absolutely not. And I would go beyond culture, and I would just say involvement in HR. I still to this day wish that I had a sole, exclusively focused HR executive that I hired in an earlier stage in CEA. But because I made that mistake, I was very gun shy from my 2013 to 15 days. And so I never hired someone with the same depth of HR experience. And I found that there were a lot of gaps. I just didn't see that much executive talent. So I later chose a CFO who had HR experience to really take that role. But upon the exit to Intertek, I was planning to hire that person. I hesitated. I waited until the process was finished. And then they later did not approve that hire. And that was something I still to this day regret that I didn't put that focus. But on the flip side, I will say I spent a lot of time on recruiting, and I still hired or participated in the hiring process for the first 100 to 125 individuals at CEA. That was extremely important, and I think really helped our selection process.
Yeah.
But only once we had a lot of these kind of core recruiting processes in place.
Yeah.
And that's related to top grading. That's the one book I would encourage anyone to read is about top grading and really see best in class.
I'll make sure to link that. I've mentioned it in a number of different episodes. The best advice you've given your kids about work?
Boy, the best advice I give my kids is be passionate about what you do. And, once again, that goes in line with saying with having fun. And so I very much want everyone in the industry to have fun and enjoy the process of deploying renewable energy and supporting the energy transition. Because to me, there are a ton of challenges, a ton of obstacles that the industry is right now, but having fun is absolutely crucial. And that's something I still tell my kids, find a hobby or passion. And then when you go down that path, eventually entering the workforce, enjoy that as much as you can.
If you could bottle one value from CEA, what would it be?
Be humble. No doubt. Humility is what allowed us to survive and recruit and build a team. And it's a very tricky value with respect to brand building. We were talking about how I was able to build and evolve the company's brand. It does require one to pound on one's chest and say we've accomplished X, Y, Z things, but also to do it in that context of being humble is extremely important, especially in any services organization or knowledge-based organization. Humility is absolutely crucial, and I think that goes through the center of many different organizations, and I see that as a gap, unfortunately, in a number of places. So, truly humble leaders, if they're not truly humble and authentic, I think that's a major obstacle to growth.
Andy, when your kids or maybe even your former team look back on the last 15 years, what do you hope that they say about the outcome and the way that you led?
I hope they say I cared and I was passionate for them, and I was passionate for the core purpose. I didn't always have that day one. And I had a lot of growing up to do at the early days of CEA, but I really did care for individuals on the team. I got to know them very, very well. I valued each and every individual, and I took the hiring process very seriously and was very committed to making sure that CEA was an environment where everyone could thrive. And I really do think that great companies take ordinary individuals and make them extraordinary. And so I really did believe everyone at CEA had the chance to be extraordinary. And that's something that that I hope that they look back and see that CEA was a special place that they could not that they couldn't necessarily replicate or just find at any other company.
Finally, Andy, is there any advice that you have for any founder who is themselves approaching their own inflection point in the growth of their business?
I would encourage someone to think very carefully about what your end goals are. And I remember a piece of advice that was given to me probably in the 2017, 18 era. I was working nonstop around the clock, constantly traveling. I had to be tenacious and pursue every single deal. And this one individual was in maybe his late 50s, probably early 60s at the time. And he talked about how he sold his business. I thought, oh, wow, I'd really like to be like him and learn from him. And he said, never forget the grind. And he said that once again, the process of building, treasure that, value that. And I think about the times I struggled, which were a lot. I think about the many years of hoofing it alone. Those were tough and difficult points in our journey. There's a huge sense of accomplishment when you overcome those obstacles. And that's very much how I felt when I went through that process myself.
Andy Klump is not only a longtime entrepreneur and solar industry veteran, but he is a friend and father. And I'm grateful to have counted you once again as a guest here on SunCast. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Nico, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun, and it won't be the last you hear from me yet. So there's still a lot to do in our industry, and a lot that you do with your amazing audience at SunCast. So
thank you.
I applaud all your listeners, and I encourage them to keep following the journey onwards and upwards.
Thanks, my friend.